Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long journey since 3 weeks ago in Nashville. And one of the things we talked about is every part of this trial is important. We're at the stage of argument. We know people are tired and they're ready to get this done. But again, this is serious. This is important. This is about justice. And this justice begins with you and what you do and how you judge the facts and apply the law that the court gave you on Saturday. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of that law, some of what we talked about when we were in Nashville. And then we're going to talk about what you've seen throughout these last few weeks in this case. (722) Leicester Street. I know that for many of you it's something that you'll never forget, something that'll be in your memory, but it'll also be in the family members' memory that they'll never forget. When you get through listening to these arguments, you get to be at the end, the final part of this journey. It's just as important as any other part, your deliberations. You recall, we talked about the charges, we talked about indictment, and we talked about what those charges were, and I'm going to go over them just a little bit with you. We know we have a 9-count indictment. Ordinarily, in a homicide case, we're usually talking about a homicide, maybe 2 homicides, but not in this case. We're talking about 6 homicides and 3 near homicides. The way they're listed on the indictment: murder first degree, a premeditated murder against Cecil Dotson Sr., Marissa Williams, Hollis Seals, Shindry Roberson, Cecil Dotson Jr., the second, the 2-year-old, Samario Dotson, the 4-year-old, and the criminal attempt murder first on Cedric Dotson, Sanaya Dotson, and Cecil Dotson Jr. If you recall, we talked about that the state carries the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, to prove every element of the crime, in this case murder in the first degree, premeditated murder. You recall, when we were in Nashville, I talked to you a little bit about that, about premeditation and what's required. And I know the court has read those jury instructions to you Saturday, and you'll have them back there with you. But if you remember, there's no definite period of time for premeditation. But again, you will have those instructions. But in this instance, Jesse Dotson unlawfully killed the alleged victims. That Jesse Dotson acted intentionally and that the killing was premeditated. So let's talk a little bit about that. Premeditated. We know from the proof in this case that Cecil Dotson Sr. was a premeditated killing. How do we know that? We know it from Jesse Dotson's own statements. How he told his mother that that Cecil Dotson ran around with a gun and he set it down and I just started shooting. We know it from the crime scene evidence. Remember the fibers where he put the pillow to Cecil Dotson's face and shot it? That's premeditation. And as to every other victim that was in that house at 722 Leicester Street, what do we know? We know that Jesse Dotson didn't want to go back to jail. And so now he's got a problem. And his answer is to eliminate witnesses. That means everybody in that house. And he proceeded to do that by shooting the adults till he ran out of bullets. And as you know, they saw me. The children, the babies. And but for some medical intervention, if you recall, I asked Dr. Marlbauer about that. I said, Dr. Marlbauer, but for medical intervention, what would have happened to Cedric Dotson? He would have died. But for medical intervention, what would have happened to Sanaya? Death. But for medical intervention, what would have happened to Cecil Dotson Jr., CJ? He would have died. And so we know that the last three counts of the indictment, criminal attempt murder first degree, any person who attempts to commit a criminal offense is guilty of a crime, that the defendant intended to commit the specific offense of murder in the first degree, and that the defendant did some act intended to cause an essential element of murder in the first degree, and at the time believed the act would cause the element to occur without further action on the defendant's part. Because at the time, he thought everybody in that house was dead. Now, when you heard the charge Saturday, in addition to the indicted charges, the judge read to you what's called lesser included offenses. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. First of all, the court probably told you that you start with the indicted charge, which in this case will be the 6 counts of premeditated first-degree murder and then the 3 counts of criminal attempt murder first degree. Before you go to anything else and make a determination as to what your verdict is on those counts. If you find on those counts guilty, then there is no further deliberation as to that count. But let's talk about some of those lesser included, particularly for premeditated first degree murder. I know that a lot of the legal terms and the lawyer talk sometimes doesn't make sense. We define words with the same word. But what you shouldn't do is look at it like when you go to a restaurant, as far as the lesser included offenses goes. You know, you go to a restaurant and you say, wow, the steak looks good, shrimp looks good too, the fish looks good, but that's not how it works. So let's talk about that. Because believe you, it's not a menu. Premeditated murder. We talked about that with Cecil, when we talked about the car and about stopping the car because it needed gas. So what's the difference between first degree murder and second degree murder? It's the premeditation aspect of it. But the facts in this case tell you, they scream at you, that there's premeditation in every single one of these counts of first degree murder. There's no issue as to anybody except Cecil Dotson Sr., because clearly there was a conscious decision to eliminate witnesses for each one of those victims that was shot. A conscious decision to eliminate those witnesses. That's premeditation. And even through Jesse Dotson's own words about how he murdered his brother. He laid his gun down and I just started shooting. And that wasn't enough. He wanted to make sure, and he got that pillow and he shot him through the pillow. And does the crime scene evidence support that? So let's look at second-degree murder. Second-degree murder would mean that there was no premeditation. That's not what we have here. Another lesser included that you will see, that you heard about when the court read to you the charges, was voluntary manslaughter. Maybe that looks good. Voluntary manslaughter. People are dead. Classic example of voluntary manslaughter. You have a couple. A significant other comes home from work, finds the other person in bed with someone else, gets in a state of passion, causes a provocation, does something they may not ordinarily do, and as a result, kills that individual, or both those individuals. Is that what we have here? Is that what happened to Shindry Roberson? Is that what happened to Marissa? Is that what happened to Hollis Seals? Is that what happened to Cecil Dotson II? Is that what happened to Samario? That's not even what happened to Cecil Dotson Sr. So it's not voluntary manslaughter. Maybe reckless homicide looks good to you. Is that? What about reckless homicide? Suppose you had a handgun. You decide it's a new handgun. I want to try it out, see how it works, see if it works all right. You set your target up in your yard. And you're shooting your target. But you missed the target one time. And unfortunately, you live in a neighborhood where other people are. And it misses the target and hits someone else in another yard. And a death results. That's a reckless type of act. Is that what we have here? I submit to you, it certainly is not. Maybe negligent homicide looks good to you. What about negligent homicide? What's that like? It says homicide. You think of negligence, you think of more like something accidental. For instance, we're getting close to the fall of the year, hunting season. Let's say it's a little later in the fall, maybe in November around Thanksgiving. Somebody's going deer hunting. The grandpa's there, the family's there, they're in the family home, and he decides he's getting up early, 5 o'clock in the morning, and he's cleaning his gun. And while he's cleaning his gun, he accidentally drops it on the floor. The gun goes off. Unbeknownst to him, a toddler has gotten up, one of his grandkids walking through the house, and that toddler is shot and that toddler dies. That's a negligent act. Outside what's reasonable, outside of the ordinary care that an individual should take. Grandpa had no intention of killing that toddler. He dropped that gun, but he shouldn't have been doing that in the house with a loaded gun. That's not what we have here. What we have here, ladies and gentlemen, are the premeditated murders of 6 individuals and the but-for medical intervention, criminal attempt murder first of 3 other children. Cecil Dotson Sr., premeditated first-degree murder. Marissa Williams, premeditated first-degree murder. Hollis Seals, premeditated first-degree murder. Shindry Roberson, premeditated first-degree murder. Cecil Dotson II, 2 years old, premeditated first-degree murder. And Samario Dotson, 4 years old, premeditated first-degree murder. I don't want to go back to jail, and they saw me. And that's what Jesse Dotson thought when he left that house. He thought everybody in that house was dead. But he was wrong. Cedric Dotson lived. He lived to come in here and talk to you. Sanaya Dotson, who couldn't have said a word, lived. And the one Lieutenant Davidson called the hero of this case, Cecil Dotson Jr., CJ, he lived to come in here and tell you what happened to him. He lived to come in here and tell you what Jesse Dotson did to him. There's a lot of time spent on crime scene. I know you remember that Sergeant Mullins was up here day after day after day talking about this crime scene, talking about what happened in that living room, talking about what happened to those children in the bedrooms, and talking about what happened to the kids like Samario and CJ in that bathroom. And if you look at that living room area, you can see how small it is, particularly when the TV cuts it off. You can see how close that coffee table is to the couch where Cecil Dotson was, where Shindry Roberson was. And why is that significant? Because Jesse Dotson told you in his confession to his mother that he got Hollis Seals 380 off that coffee table. We heard a lot about gangs. And the gangs did this, the GDs did this. The unarmed gang came into this house and did this and sliced up and beat children, shot women. You have to ask yourself, is any of that reasonable? Who would come to kill and not be armed? Because we know that the weapons that were used were in the house. Jesse Dotson used the weapons that were available to him at 722 Lester. You remember Mr. Lapone cross-examined Jesse Dotson? And when he talked about he picked up those knives, which gangster disciple would be using this? And we know that those weapons were used. We know that a 9mm was used, and we know that Hollis's 380 was used because Jesse Dotson told Lieutenant Armstrong, now Deputy Director Armstrong, that he used the gun that was there, that was Marissa's gun, and that he told his mother that he used Hollis Seals 380 caliber that he got off the coffee table. Weapons that were in the house up until He ran out of bullets. And they saw me. That's what he told his mother. They saw me. So they've got to be eliminated too. All premeditation. You remember Lieutenant Armstrong when he was on this stand, and he asked him, he told you how he asked Jesse Dotson some specific questions. Why did he ask him? Because there were questions that only the killer would know. First thing he wanted to do was establish identity. Because at this point in time, Jesse Dotson didn't know that CJ had named. And so Lieutenant Armstrong says, what do they call you? They call me Junior, Uncle Junior. Do they call anybody else that? No. Does anybody look like you? No. Okay. Tell me, what did you use? Knives. What kind of knives? Kitchen knives. Where'd you get them from? The kitchen drawer. Weapons available and in the house. This is the kitchen. You know when he said he used it from the kitchen drawer? There it is. Those knives, where they came from. You see how the crime scene corroborates what Jesse Dotson even said himself, what Lieutenant Armstrong asked him? And you remember how Sergeant Mullins told you they had to sort of look for these items. You know, CJ was in the tub, had to pull the mattress back. All this is part of that crime scene that was so horrific that you have sitting over there today. Of course, there was one knife that Sergeant Mullins didn't have to look for. That one. That was the one that CJ told you that Jesse Dotson plunged into his skull. Other weapons. You heard the doctors talk about blunt force trauma. And we know that there was the victim's blood on these boards. Where did it come from? Inside the house. Remember all the time defense attorneys talk to you about DNA evidence, how it doesn't point to Jesse Dotson. Spent a lot of time talking about DNA. And then Jesse Dotson puts himself in the house where he was. But isn't that consistent with what Special Agent Lauren James told you? He said, Mr. Henderson, when I get touch DNA, I'm surprised. Because we rarely get it. DNA is based mostly on the sciences on fluids. We rarely get touch DNA. I'm surprised when we get it. Because we know Jesse Dotson was in the house. He says he was in the house. He tells us he rode CJ's bicycle away from the house. And the surviving children, they told you who did this. Cedric Dotson. You remember the horrific injuries, how they were beaten? You saw all the testimony of Dr. Marlbauer, who told you how the skulls were crushed and what they had to go through. And Cecil, the same, but worse. Let's talk about CJ's account of this. I want you to think about something. I just want you to believe that they were just told what to say, they were prepared. Then you ever dealt with kids, you ever try to get a kid to memorize stuff like that? In that kind of detail, they'll never get it right. CJ knows what happened because he was there and he saw Jesse Dotson do it. He knows who did that to him. And so did Cedric. What do you think it was like for CJ to walk into this courtroom and tell you that and seeing Jesse Dotson for the first time in the flesh in 2.5 years since he plunged that knife into his skull? But he did come in here and tell me. And he did. I had him to get down off that stand. Because I wanted you to know, want you to see him talk about this. Not me talk about this, but CJ talk about this. Not me feed him yes sir and no sirs and yes sirs. I wanted you to hear CJ talk about it. I wanted you to hear Cedric talk about it. And that's exactly what they came in this courtroom and did. CJ told you about where he was and what he was doing. He told you stuff that he couldn't have known about. He told you about the lady sitting on the arm of the couch. You remember Sergeant Mullen's testimony about the bullets and something that was and the blood that was on the arm of the couch? That's what CJ saw. He saw Shendry Roberson on that couch, and he heard her tell Jesse Dotson, "I love you," because she didn't want to die. He told you about Jesse Dotson carrying that garbage bag around. His grandmother was there. She doesn't know what went on in that house. That's what CJ saw. He told you about the man dressed in black. And you heard Erica Smith talk about Hollis Seals, and you saw the pictures of him in black on that floor when he came in there. He told you about the sparks and the smoke coming out of that gun as he watched Jesse Dotson murder his father. He told you about the kids asking to go to the bathroom. And while he's in the tub with a knife plunged in his head, he told you about Samario coming in there and he's dripping blood on this toilet seat. And we know from the crime scene that his blood was in there, including a bloody palm print in that bathroom. He told you about hearing his mother hit the floor. These are things that CJ saw and experienced and had to re-experience here in this courtroom in front of you. Defense presented an expert, Dr. Nancy Aldridge. I thought that was quite interesting. And I want you to recall what she told you. Their expert. She says the one thing you don't want to do when you ask kids something who have been through some trauma, you don't want to ask them those type of leading questions where they just say yes sir. You want to ask an open-ended question where they can tell you what happened to them. You remember how I talked to CJ? I said, do you remember if something bad happened here? Tell me what happened to you. I didn't tell CJ what happened to him. He told me, he told you what happened to him. Not somebody came through the door, yes sir, and they said so-and-so, yes sir, and they did this, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, because their expert told you that's the exact wrong way to do it. And then on redirect, I got back up here and I said, tell me who did this to you? And CJ told you and Cedric told you. But you know what's telling? Did you ever hear the defense ask them, who did this to you? They told them things, which is exactly what Dr. Aldridge said, don't do. It's not reliable if you do it that way. Said right here and told you that. So why? Why wouldn't they ask them? They didn't want the answer. They didn't want CJ to tell them who did this to them. They didn't want CJ to describe what happened. They wanted to tell the children what happened to them. And for them to say, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. You know, I'm not making it up. You sat right here and heard that doctor say, don't do it this way. Then Mr. Lapone said, you know, it's like stabbing. She says, yeah, that's not the way you do it. You got to ask that open-ended question as to what happened. You can't tell them so they can say yes sir or no sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. She made that real clear. That's exactly what they did. Never once, not once, did they say, CJ, can you tell me what happened? Describe. And then this, or you know, it was all, let me tell you what happened. You remember the blood on the arm of the couch. Just like what CJ said. The man in black lying on the floor. Just like what CJ said. The telling crime scene where all this massacre, mayhem, and murder occurred. The living room. Parts of a purse dumped out on the floor. The coffee table, the blood, were clearly Marissa was sitting and drugged down. CJ told you about the bedrooms and what he saw and what he witnessed and what he heard. He told you about the bathroom and how he fought for his life and watched his siblings lose theirs. This man, Jesse Dotson, wants you to believe that he heard it and he was just hiding. But this is what the evidence shows. It shows a cover-up and a cleanup. Shell casings police were left behind. Crime scene stage. You heard Sergeant Mullins talk about this misdirection. Clearly all this was staged. The pulling of the pants down. The cleanup. Thought this was interesting. Remember Kiara Jones when she told you about how Jesse Dotson came over there in the early morning hours and he went to the shed, she heard water running, and we showed you that map with the bleach on it, how the bleach was out of place, and what did Jesse Dotson tell you? He threw up. After riding 5 miles on a bicycle, after doing all that, he didn't throw up then, he got over there and he threw up. And of course, we don't want to rinse it off. We want to pour Clorox on the towel and we cleaned it up. Is that even reasonable? Is that believable? I submit to you that it isn't. It's way beyond your common sense. And I guarantee you there was nothing in those jury instructions that told you to leave your common sense outside that door. But that's what he did. He covered up and he cleaned up as best he could. Remember that garbage bag that CJ saw him with? I wonder what was in that when you rode away from there. Common sense and reason. Your family's just been slaughtered. You're in the back bedroom, according to Jesse Dodson. Mr. Crip. Tough guy. You don't call 911. It was available to you. You don't call the police, family, because he don't talk to police. Even if his family just got slaughtered. Remember that? You don't talk to police. He leaves 722 Lester on a child's bike. How do we know that? Police didn't even know a bike was missing. He didn't even tell Lieutenant Armstrong that he told his mother that he left on CJ's bike. And how do we know it's true? Because they sent officers to 1403 Silver, where Jesse knew, where the killer knew, where he left that bike. In that shed that Miss Jones and her daughter just moved in that house. They had no clue about what Jesse had done. But that bike was exactly where he said it was. And he went there and he hit the bike. Your family, your brother, friends, nieces, nephews, children, babies, for 40 hours lay in that house. And what do? You go to dinner, you go to work, and you don't say a word to one soul. You don't go pick up a payphone. You don't make an anonymous tip. Hey, you might want to check out over there. That's his behavior. Not one word. Who could go to work knowing that? Who could sit there and work with their father knowing your son's dead, his friends are dead, your grandchildren are dead, your baby grandchildren are dead? Jesse Dodson could because he did. Even when the victims are found, even when Erica Smith and others contact the police, he never says nothing. Lies about the last time he saw the victim. He tells you that Cecil dropped him off, knowing Cecil was laying in that house murdered. And where did the GD stuff start from? Jesse Dodson. That's where it started. Right out there with his siblings, his family members. Yeah, the GDs did this. Lie after lie after lie. Excuse, excuse, excuse. Cover up, clean up. Puts gun to his head. They want to tell you he's suicidal. He didn't know what he was doing. It was days later. He goes into protective custody just like everybody else. He never feels anything, any urgency to say, listen, I know we're all here in this protective custody, but Mama, I can't stand to see you like this. Sister Nicole, I can't stand to see you suffering like this. Daddy, I can't stand to see you suffering like this. I gotta tell you this. I know what happened. I was there. I heard it. I saw it. Not Jesse Dodson. Didn't say a word. In protective custody. The police are protecting him. And I ask you, is that the behavior of a victim? Common sense. Is that how a victim would act? I don't care how afraid you were. Is that how a victim would act? Not to tell a soul. Let those bodies, let his brother, let his family members sit in that house and rot. But that's how mass murder acts. That's the behavior of Jesse Dotson. March 7th, 2008. Significance of that day. Our hero becomes coherent in the hospital. And he tells Sergeant Mason, Uncle Junior did it. Now keep in mind, they want to tell you that he was fed all this stuff and he's telling you all this stuff. Jesse was the suspect. Remember? They interviewed this person after person. Jesse was one of those people they interviewed, sent him on his way, and put him in protective custody. They weren't after Jesse. They had no clue about Jesse from that crime scene. They didn't know what they were dealing with. It wasn't until CJ named him on March the 7th that Jesse became a suspect. He was over there with the rest of the family, being protected by the police, saying not one word. So nobody fed anybody anything, any information. CJ was the one who came up with Jesse Dotson. Because as far as the police were concerned, they're running down 100 other leads and protecting him. He names Uncle Junior Jesse as the one who stabbed him. Well, of course, the police are going to want to talk to Jesse to see if this is adding up, if this is making any sense of what CJ told them. And you remember, a lot was made about when CJ first came out of surgery and they were trying to talk to him and he was saying all kinds of things. The defense brought you in here and they handed this Facebook page up to Willie Boyd Hill and he's like, I don't know who this guy is. And I'm like, yeah, here's Roderick. Here's Roderick. But we brought you Roderick in here, didn't we? We brought you that middle school kid who was 13 years old at the time in here and let you sit in and talk to him. Roderick. Doesn't know Willie Boyd Hill or GDs or anything else. But CJ did become coherent on March 7, 2008. And he did tell the police who did this to him. And that's what he said. Uncle Junior, Jesse Dotson. And so the police obviously want to talk to Uncle Junior. They want to talk to Jesse Dotson. Lieutenant Armstrong at the time, and the deputy director, when he got up here, he told you what happened, how long he was there, and what Jesse Dotson told him. Told him things that only the killer would know. But what's interesting, first couple of 3 hours, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, not me. And he plays that tape. And he knows there is a live victim who can point him out. And he breaks down and tells you. He tells Lieutenant Armstrong that he did it how he did it. And then, so significant, as far as the police are concerned at this point, he's confessed, he's given specific information, they're done with him. They don't say, hey, is anybody you want to talk to? Jesse Dotson says, I want to talk to my mom. Because he knows what he's done and he wants to get his goodbyes in. He wants to talk to his mother. So Lieutenant Armstrong makes it happen. Go and gets her out of protective custody. Jesse's request, and they bring her in there. And you heard Miss Shaw up here. Can you imagine what that was like for a mother to come in here, to look at her son that she admittedly still loves, she's got that mother's love, and to know that he murdered my other son and murdered my grandchildren? Do you know how hard that was? But she sat up here and she did it. And she told you what Jesse told her, and how he confessed to her. Because remember, Jesse told his mother about the bicycle. That led to going to get the bicycle. Remember, I asked you, was anybody else in there? No. They embraced, they hugged. And finally, we know who the killer is. Finally, after those people laid there in that house, hour after hour, after CJ laid in that tub for 40 hours with a knife in his head that Jesse Dotson put there, as he walked around like nothing was wrong. He murders his brother, makes sure, gets the pillow, and it's like a chain reaction. Jesse was not wanting to go back to prison. And once he killed Cecil Dotson Sr., it was either I'm going back or I'm taking out everybody. And that's exactly what he did, or what he tried to do. He murdered Marissa Williams, eliminating the witness. He murdered Hollis Seals. He murdered Shindry Roberson. And what did he use? He used weapons that were in the house. No gang, no GDs are gonna come over there and have to find weapons in the house. Children. You remember Miss Shaw told you, said, what about the babies? And what did Jesse say? They saw me. So I had to kill them too. But again, anybody who could walk around like nothing was going on, 40 hours, knowing his family was laying in that house rotten, that's the kind of person who could do that. Stabbed all the children, sliced them up, and beat them with boards. You saw the autopsy reports, and you heard from Dr. Marlbauer, and you saw the crime scene. Horrific injuries. And what did Jesse say he was doing? He was running away, riding CJ's bike, and hiding it in the shed at 1403 Silver, where the police found it. And 2 years after Jesse Dotson accepted responsibility for the horrors he committed in that house against adults, children, and babies. He comes into this courtroom, and now he's under the bed. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the proof in this case. As I said, you've gotten the law. But I believe that each and every one of you has their own common sense, their own reason. And I implore that each and every one of you do what truth dictates and justice demands. Find Jesse Dotson guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder of Cecil Dotson Sr., of Marissa Williams, of Shinji Robertson, of Holly Seals, of 4-year-old Samario Dotson, of 2-year-old Cecil Dotson II, and the criminal attempt, but for medical intervention, criminal attempt murder first degree of Cedric, Sanaya, and CJ.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take about a 10-minute recess. Don't discuss the case.